Everybody and those participating to our April 2022 challenge seminar from UNA Greater Lincolnshire. We are running these for two reasons. One, to inform ourselves by inviting key people to talk about sustainable development goals, but also providing a resource that we can share down the line with all manner of people locally, nationally and internationally. A resource to learn from and a dialogue to listen to. So I'm delighted to hand over to David Whittaker, who will introduce tonight's guest presenter.
Okay, good evening everyone, and it's our pleasure to welcome Fabio Pulizzi as the presenter for this evening's challenge seminar. Fabio is a physicist, a graduate of the University of Rome, followed by a doctorate at Nijmegen in the Netherlands. He moved to the UK 20 years ago as a physicist, research physicist, before joining the Nature Publishing Group. His career gave him the opportunity to explore the role of science and technology in addressing environmental issues, especially water and agriculture. In January of this year, he was appointed the chief editor of Nature Water, a new journal to be launched in 2023. So we're so grateful to the charity WaterAid for sourcing Fabio for tonight's seminar, which is looking at the sustainable development goals for water and sanitation. So over to you, Fabio, and really welcome you this evening.
First of all, thank you very much for this this kind invitation, and yes, it's really quite an exciting theme. It's a very complex theme, but it's very exciting, and I prepared something to share with you, but primarily to just give some information and give the basis for some discussion, and I will move these forwards. So I think this is the I would like Clive to say something about this, because it's the introduction to the series, right?
Yes, thank you, Fabio. We have taken the approach that there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals leading to 2030, and our challenge is to say to ourselves and to those who want to hear what we're saying, what are we going to be doing to address those and move them forward in the next period of time? 2030 will soon be here, and the question will be, if it's not us as individuals, as consumers, as part of a workplace or part of a community doing something now, then is it when? And if it's not those who can, then who will? So, we can't rely upon those who have limited ability to make change to do it. So it's those who can change to make the differences. That's our challenge that we give to ourselves and to others. Thank you, Fabio.
Thank you. So what I've decided to do was to break my presentation in three parts, and I've taken the liberty to draw a little bit from my experience at work. I'm here. I have to say, I am here as a WaterAid speaker. I was contacted by WaterAid to talk to you, but I will draw a little bit from my experience at work. And this is the first part. So that I would like to introduce, and it's relatively high level, but it wants to introduce the issues particularly regarding research around water and society. The second part will just be an introduction to the actual SDG 6, what it is about, what are the targets, what are the ways to measure the targets, and where we're at now. And then at the end, I will finish with something about WaterAid, which is very closely connected to SDG 6, and particularly to one or two of the main targets of SDG 6. So for the first part, which is water and society, I will start with something that you see in all school books and school lectures. Is the water cycle. I know this is very simplistic. It's just I put it just there to say that eventually water isn't going anywhere. It is around the earth. It stays around the earth and the atmosphere, and it goes around in circles. It comes down from clouds, then it ends up in through precipitation, through to water reservoirs like lakes and rivers, ends up in the ocean, sometimes directly as a runoff, other times going through underground, and then eventually filtering into the ocean as well. And after that, it will evaporate, it will transpire, and go back to the clouds to keep the soil cycle going. Now, of this water, the one that society can use is the one in the lakes, in the rivers, and in the groundwater infiltrations. And this is only 3% of all the waters on Earth. So 97% of that cannot be used at all. As a matter of fact, only 0.5% in total can be used, because the other 2.5% of the fresh water is basically it cannot be used because it's either in glaciers, in ice, or is too deep underground, and it cannot be reached. Now, the point of the water cycle here is that I wanted to show you what happens when you start getting the effect of society on it. And it's very complicated, because it is complicated. There are several factors that are related to human activities, and, to be honest, also to variations in the climate that are not necessarily anthropogenic, therefore derived from human activity. So first of all, global warming itself will affect the water cycle by affecting several things. First of all, it will affect the snow caps by melting them, and therefore producing more water, if you like. It will affect the precipitation in a relatively dramatic way, in the sense that global warming and climate change more generally create so-called they intensify events like tornadoes, storms, hurricanes, and therefore floods, which all the consequences of those events. But it also affects the water availability more directly, in the sense that by changing the water levels in the oceans, it can affect the salinity of freshwater reservoirs as well. So as I indicated here, it does this by changing the borders between fresh waters in rivers and lakes, and the ocean, in rivers primarily, and the ocean, but also by infiltrating salt water inside groundwater reservoirs. And that's only one. Look at infrastructures. I'm talking about dams, and talking about levees. Levees, I should say. That all has an impact on the ecosystem, on biodiversity, and so on. Agriculture, of course, has a massive effect on water reservoir, because in first instance, just the adaptation of land to agriculture means affects the transpiration from plants, but also dipping into groundwater reservoir, in some cases at a very, very huge level, affects also the water availability in groundwater aquifers that are not going to be replenished very quickly. Then there's pollution, of course. Pollution, we always, at least myself, when I think about pollution, the first thing I think about is industrial pollution, for example, heavy metals. And that certainly has a big impact. But we have to think about pollution in many other ways. Agriculture is a massive pollutant as well. In nutrients like either pesticides, but even nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, they can actually be an enormous pollution for reservoirs. Not to mention pollutants that are coming from human activities like pharmaceutical usage, for example. So the effect of society on the water cycle and the water reservoir, as well as the situation of different the water availabilities around the world, can create what is known as global water scarcity. The water scarcity is defined in different ways. I mean, technically, you can define it as something which is, is estimated what is the personal need of water, and it's defined as water stress if it is below 1,700 square meters per person. If it becomes lower than 1,000 square meters per person, or water, that we would be talking about water scarcity, and below 500, it becomes absolute scarcity. Now, this map is taken from this report here, is showing the water scarcity situations around the world. And you can see that in principle, in most of North America and Western Europe, we have little or no water scarcity. But I think what is interesting here is the difference between what is known as physical water scarcity and economic water scarcity. Physical really means that there is no water. End of. End of story. It's just the water is not there, either because there's droughts or because the water is polluted, but simply the water is not physically available. With economic water scarcity, the definition is that it is the unavailability of water due to economic reasons. So if in those countries that don't have enough economic means to create clean water or extract clean water from the ground, those are situations of economic water scarcity. And I find this picture very interesting. I only looked at it recently because it shows, in many ways, there is not surprising, but in many ways it is. If you look at, for example, a light blue approaching physical water scarcity, those are areas of Eastern Europe or Middle Eastern area where I would have thought that actually the water was not approaching water scarcity, but it actually is. So how do we solve problems related to water scarcity? This is the quote that I've taken from this book by Sandra Postel. Sandra Postel is an ecologist in origin, and is a writer and a communicator, and she's also the winner of the Stockholm Prize for Water, which is basically the Nobel Prize related to water. She won this in 2021, but the book is 2017. And I like this quote because it's really hit the nail on the head. I think that's the English expression, and I apologize, but after 20 years, I still have problems remembering these sayings, the expressions. But because it's exactly like that, you cannot solve the problem of water in one simple way, and you need the integrated contribution from scientists, politicians, and citizens from coming from all backgrounds. And even if you just think about science, it needs the contribution from earth and environmental scientists, but from engineers and also from social scientists, because at the end of the day, we're talking about here the use of water from society. So if you just want to list the ways in which this can be done, again, it's a contribution from many aspects. I think the most important one, and the one that probably encompasses all the other ones, is the water management. Water management has to be more efficient. So the most important thing is avoiding wastes. And how do you do this? Well, apart from creating an efficient way of cleaning water, or so water treatment, if you like, so better ways to filtrate, creating clean water from salt water, so with desalination, or even capturing water from the air. Seems, when I think about atmospheric water harvesting, I'm thinking about something which is more science fiction than anything else. But as some of the scientists that I'm working with have been telling me, at the end of the day, with global warming, we're going to have more water in the air than in the water reservoir. So at some point, we need to find ways to grab it back. The better water management will probably mean that we will also have to move towards water treatment that is more local. So to avoid, having to transport clean water along long distances, therefore creating problems in terms of energy and also in terms of costs. And we also need to move to transition towards more water recycling. And the example that I put here is, for example, is the accumulation of grey water and use it for agriculture. When talking about grey water, just to clarify, is the water that is basically being used either industrially or in households for washing dishes or for showers and so on. But then we have to optimize the agriculture in terms of water use. So, for example, using less pesticides and less fertilizer, so more efficient fertilizers and pesticides that will, enhance crop productivity with less water. Use particularly agricultural methods that have used less water. We need to improve legislation as well, because the water usage and water use and abuse should be legislated in a way that it prevents wastes, it prevents depletions of water, of aquifers. And improved knowledge, this is, I put it as the last, but eventually, not only is it important, I mean, things like what we do in here eventually are important because making people aware of the situation and our problems related to water scarcity is the first most important step. And if you look at the action plan related to United Nations, a lot of them are based on improving knowledge and improving capability. And there are other ways, of course. So this was just a little introduction about water scarcity and what can the, and the relationship with society. In terms of the SDGs, though, this is my second part. Okay, you obviously know all this. You know this picture. I mean, this is why you even have these talks, right? So, but what I put it there to discuss this is because I've been thinking for many years now that okay, there's one of the SDGs called SDG 6, which is clean water and sanitation. That's an obvious way in which the United Nations have decided to tackle clean water and the problems related to water. But as a matter of fact, SDG 6 is not the only one related to water. You just have to think for a moment and you realize that at least a few others will be. Clearly, zero hunger is strongly related to water because it's, production of food, for example, is related to use of water in agriculture. But even affordable clean energy, there's a strong relationship between clean energy and water use. And those are what I would call the more physical ones. But there's also more social ones. If you think about poverty, the water, poverty, inequality, gender equality, those are all related to availability of water. Because water availability allows people to work, allows people to look for work, allows people to get an education, and it eventually reduces the inequality between people who are rich in water and people who are not. And the gender equality is a very, very important issue as well, because as a matter of fact, and as it is considered a lot by WaterAid as well, the burden of fetching water in countries where the water is not available on demand eventually falls primarily on women and children, but women in particular. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you actually realize that water is related to all the SDGs. And this is, when reading the reports from the United Nations, you'll read the same things, because just thinking about sustainable and cities, that can only happen with sustainable water use and everything else. If you think about peace and justice, that again has a strong relationship with water, because they use the transboundary water reservoir can create conflicts, can create well, even wars, but even just political conflict and so on. So if you really think about it, there's a strong relationship with all of them. But focusing for a moment on SDG 6 again. So SDG 6 is about ensuring available and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Okay, so this is if you open the SDG 6 page on the United Nations website, this is there's a picture of basically what the situation is in 2020, where you see that there's still 2 billion people that don't have drinking water, for 3.6 billion people, they don't have safely managed sanitation, and 2.3 billion people lack basic hygienes. I mean, these are huge numbers, of course. I mean, we're talking about is it a third of the population of the Earth? So these are really massive numbers. 2.3 billion people live in water-stressed countries, and these are all numbers that are all related, of course. Okay, so SDG 6 this is the general scope of SDG 6, but if you look more carefully, I don't know, this is a bit difficult to read, but I just put them there to show you what all the targets are, what are the ways to to actually measure the targets are, what the indicators are, and who is responsible for this, to look at the data and to look at the progress. They're all there. What I would like to do is draw your attention briefly to the left. Those things I added, those acronyms or those labels there. The rest is taken from this this publication in the journal Water. And so the first two targets are the targets that can be acronymized as WASH, so which is water and sanitation and hygiene. And this is also what water rate focuses on. 6.3 is water pollution, 6.4 water scarcity, 6.5 is called IWRM, which means integrated water resource management. And this is, I mean, it's okay, it's jargon if you like, but it is the way in which the United Nations approaches the use of water. And if you like, I would actually think it's important to look at how it is defined, and it is defined as basically as the coordinated development of water, land, and all related resources. And I think what makes me think about this is that eventually, again, we cannot take water away from everything else. The only way to achieve sustainable use of water is by putting it in the context of the water and land. And energy. So when we're talking about related resources, that's what we're talking about. The rest is ecosystem protection and wastewater management and capacity building. With capacity building, we're talking about creating the knowledge and the ability to maintain water resources and to use water resources in a sustainable way. And so there's been the progress report of the SDGs published in 2021. In fact, thanks David for pointing this out to me. And these are part, let's say these 7 points that I put here are the ones that I've extracted from the part relative to SDG 6. First one is already telling us all the story, I think. The main conclusion is the world is not on track to achieve goal 6. So goal 6 should be obviously reached by 2030. All the targets should be reached by 2030, and we're not on track for it. Okay, so I put in red here the ones that are negative in my view, and in green the ones that are relatively positive in a way. So the second one tells us that actually between 2000 and 2020, there has been an improvement in the number of people that have access to drink water and sanitation, 2 billion and 2.4 billion respectively. This, however, doesn't solve the problem that we still have over 2 billion people around the world. So it's big improvement, but we're still far from reaching the situation in which everybody has access to water and sanitation. At point 3, this is about the treatment of wastewater generated from households, and this is 56%. I counted this as relatively good, even if it means that also, of course, it is 44% of households that still do not have water treatment. And the water use efficiency, okay, this is measured in very different ways, but in the last 5 years, up to 2020, has improved by 10%, which is a good thing. However, talking about this integrated water resource management, of the 129 countries, thinking about the fact that the United Nations has 193 countries, 129 out of them are not on track to meet the target of IWRM. And if we're thinking about transboundary water cooperation, this is what is essential for international conflicts, and it's likely to lead to bigger problems in the future. Only 24 out of the 153, when I say I find, that means that 100% of the water resources are regulated by international cooperation. In the other 22%, only 70% of the resources are regulated. In the rest, 109 is even less than that. And finally, only 14 out of 109 countries in which this was measured, the involvement of communities in water regulations is very poor. Okay, so in only 14 of them, it's the communities are, let's say, are included in the management and decision making. In the rest, it isn't. And this is another point that has to be improved, because the involvement of the communities is eventually the one that is going to create the difference, is going to make the difference. One last thing about SDG 6 is related to SDG 6 is that, in fact, the United Nations has declared the decade between 2018 and 2028, and specifically between the two World Water Days, 22nd of March in the 2 years, as the Water Action Decade. And I mean, this is not too dissimilar, if you like, from SDG 6. But it has the objective of advancing sustainable development, and then energize implementation of existing programs, and mobilize action to achieve the 2030 agenda. And I want to think about particularly about the number 2 and number 3, because they really are about people, are about action taken by people. So the programs already exist. The problem is they're not implemented as much as they should be. So this is why it should be, and the implementation should be energized. And also the action doesn't seem to be happening as much as it should. So the other objective is to mobilize the action. So next year in March, around World Water Day, again, there is a midterm appraisal, and there's the UN 2023 Water Conference, which I'm personally really anxious to hear about. But one thing, again, that it is very important to realize is that the action plan of the World Water Action Decade is really about people. It's about improving knowledge, improving communication, improving network, and capacity building. So it means it's a matter of really empower people, empower community in manage water in a more sustainable way. So I will finish. Well, I'm sorry, I think I'm taking a long time. So if I will finish with a little bit with WaterAid. And as I said, WaterAid is it's really focusing on the wash part of SDG 6, but it's not necessarily related. So it's not necessarily, it's actually not related. It's completely independent from the United Nations. In fact, WaterAid is a non-governmental body, is a charity basically, that was launched in 1981, so long before the SDG program, and it has really the scope, the goal of providing clean water, decent toilets, good hygiene, and those are the 3 main objectives. The main offices are in London, of course. I think not, of course, but I think we know that. And this is the way it is distributed around the world. So there are some federation members that are the ones on the left, and there are regional offices and country programs around the world. As you can see, that mostly based in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And the way it works, it really focuses on one of the primary objective is really to focus on providing clean water that is easily achievable for people in developing areas. So one of the things that WaterAid does in order to spread the word, if you like, about water scarcity, to show really case studies. I mean, this is a case study of a girl in Ethiopia that basically has to walk kilometers and kilometers every day to provide water for the family and even for the farm. And this is not a unique case. This is one of many. And water that eventually ends up being, as you can see from the picture, very often is not necessarily regulated from a point of view of hygiene. One of the other issues that it tackles is, as we said, sanitation and hygiene. This is another schoolgirl this is in Mozambique, in fact, and the issue that people like this girl called Agira have is that in schools, in 37% of schools around the world, there are no decent sanitation facilities. So not only there's no water in the schools, and which means that pupils have to go around spending time looking for water rather than being in school, but it's the matter of the question of toilets and sanitation facilities, an extremely important one, particularly for girls, because that means that they have to go they have to go home basically every time they're at school. They have to go home to go to the toilet, and whenever it's possible to have, assuming that they have toilets at home, but in any case they have to go far from school because obviously the lack of toilets affects dignity, affects apart from hygiene and sanitation. Now, so what does water aid does? How does it work? The idea is to provide services like that. That's one of the main tasks, services in terms of clean water and sanitation. The first thing is it's a long process. The question of really analyzing the context and working. I think that's the most important one, is working in partnership. So water aid doesn't go to a place and say you need this. And we give it to you. It's a matter of understanding from the local community, not only understanding their actual needs, working in partnership also with other charities, with other bodies, to find out what the best approach is. There is eventually one of the aims is to deliver the service, creating water pumps, water wells, sanitation facilities, and so on. But even more importantly is developing the capacity. So providing people the knowledge they need, not only to create and produce those services, to deliver the services themselves, but essentially to maintain them. The maintenance of the services in terms of water and sanitation is probably one of the biggest problems in developing countries, because that's where the bottleneck is eventually in ensuring that water and sanitation are available all the time. It also, water aid does influence in advocacy at the political level. And then it's a matter not only of analyzing the individual context, but it's a continuing analysis and planning and predicting in the future what's going to happen, taking all things into consideration. There's just incidentally and anecdotally, if you like, I recently was discussing with somebody from a climate resilient association in the United States, and they had just started a partnership with Water Aid to research the effects of climate change on the potential availability of water, and therefore the delivery of services that Water Aid can provide. So I'm just showing you some case studies here of things that Water Aid, the type of projects that Water Aid does. This is in Mali, in a place called Talo, I believe, in the Blood district, and this was an area where healthcare centers do not have water. So you can imagine what the situation could be if the healthcare center doesn't have available water. So in collaboration with other bodies, Water Aid had a program of 4.4 million to create water availability in, I think, in 23 health centers, and this is an ongoing project. The second one is this case in Papua New Guinea, and it's particularly focused on school for primary school children, in which not only there's a lack of water, but because the water is the area around this village is really has water scarcity, and the little water that there is infiltrated continuously from seawater because it's very close to the coast. And the program of Water Aid has to, of course, create available water, deliver available water and sanitation facilities, but also focusing on menstrual health hygiene. For the school has about 50% of girls 50% of boys, and there is really a necessity to increase knowledge about menstrual health hygiene. So within the project itself, there is the project is half on education and half on delivering of services as well. And this is the last case that I will show you, and this is about the provision of sanitation facilities in Uganda, and this is done in partnership with WaterAid Uganda, and primarily is not only about the provision of sanitation facilities, but is also on delivering of ways to maintenance, for the maintenance of these facilities. And this goes back to what I was talking about before, because this is really eventually the real blockage in terms of ensuring continuous sanitation and clean water. So it's about providing help to train people for being able to maintain it. So this is actually a WaterAid worker based in Uganda that has been trained to maintain sanitation facilities. In this case, this is really a sanitation facility. I do not remember the name of the village, but and it's the male part. So the WaterAid, of course, is a charity. So the way to because we're talking about what individual, what citizens can do, WaterAid as a charity needs donations all the time, and this can be done in different ways, organizing all types of activities, but also in a way, the bottom left, you see volunteer and join the speaker network. This is partly what I do, and to basically spread the word and make increase awareness, and not only increase donations, because which is part of what fundraising is part of what WaterAid does, but or WaterAid volunteers do. But it is primarily, at least for what I can, for the way I interpret it, is really spreading the word and making people aware. And I will finish by thanking you, but also I put here some further reading and further resources, and they're really personal choices. So this is nothing to do with WaterAid. These are only things that I have discovered myself. Some of the books there, I chose 4 and 4. Of the books, I confess, I only read the first 2, The Replenish and Water by Stephen Solomon. Water 4.0 is the one I'm reading now, and it's extremely interesting. It's quite technical, but it's very, very interesting, because David Sedlak is another, very high-profile water scientist, and he kind of suggests what the water industry should move towards in order to be sustainable. And the last one, which I have not read, and I haven't even started reading, is Water by biography by Giulio Boccaletti. If you happen to watch the H2O program on the BBC, Giulio Boccaletti actually appears in the program, and I think in episode 2, when it talks about the Egyptians and the way to measure the levels of the Nile. I then put these videos because I actually happened to watch Dark Waters very recently, which is about, I think it was on the BBC, on the iPlayer, and it was about PFAS, the PFAS pollution, which is the pollutant of the moment. Saying it like that is a bit makes it a little bit. It maybe belittles it a little bit, but it is true that it is the one that we are now realizing how bad it is and how poor the regulation is about it. It's around it. Second one is Even the Rain, or También la Lluvia, because it's a Colombian movie, and it's about what I found interesting about it. It's really about economic costs of water and the way in which some population are completely exploited. And the También la Lluvia, or Even the Rain, that means they make us pay even the rain. This is really a big issue, a big problem on when water becomes really a common good, or it becomes something that you have to pay for. Brave Little World is a documentary about water scarcity, and I have not seen it yet. I think it's actually created by Matt Damon, the actor. I think he has a charity, and it's on Netflix. I have it there on my pile of things to watch when I have some time. And NH2O is the program on the BBC that that I think is still available if you haven't seen it. I've seen the first two. I need to see the third one, which I think is going to be the most impactful. And I think David can confirm that. I think he has seen them all, and he would confirm that. And then, of course, there's the WaterAid website and the SDG 6 website. They have a lot of information there. Thank you. I am, of course, ready to take any question, but also I'm any comments. I mean, at the end of the day, I like to hear what everybody thinks as well about the topic.
Can I just start there? So I just turning my mute button on or off in the right way. Have you stopped screen sharing so we can see people? Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, just to say many thanks to that. I've got a number of things I'd like to raise out of that. But if there are any others, just put your hand up or sign that you want to say something and do it. But I'm going to ask a question to start off with, and that's about the balance between the water issues in advanced or developed countries and the water issues in developing. When we saw the map, we saw the massive issues about water scarcity. I don't necessarily think that the UK and other parts where there's much more water. What are the differences between the challenges faced by those two communities?
Well, I think that it's difficult to tell exactly. I mean, I think that one of the big issues that for the communities that live in places where like us, where the water is there, is that we are taking it for granted. That is one of the big messages that we get from what we hear. Things are not necessarily going to be the same all the time. So our problems with water is that it gets polluted, of course, it gets used a lot by industry, and we use a lot of it. But it's not necessarily going to be that way. So I think that we don't realize it yet, maybe the problems of water scarcity, but eventually it will finish for us as well. And our economy is entirely based on the tremendous use of water. So this is the main difference with countries where actually water isn't there, and there is no water for survival. Then I would say that there are the places in between, and I refer to primarily the US and the Western US, where things are, they used to have water on demand, but things are already changing enough that they're realizing that the way they approach water are different. They have to change. They have to be different from what they were before. And one of the topics that I'm quite interested to explore, and I've actually tried to discuss this in a recent event that I organized with work, is to what extent the changes in let's say in the Western world and the way that we approach the issues of water scarcity in the Western world will change in a way that we are going to put less emphasis on solving the problems of the developing world because we have to also solve our own. It's a difficult concept to explain, actually. But when I discussed it with, it's almost like, I guess that the easier way to think about it is that, we at the moment we know that there's people that don't have water, so we want to help them with that, and we can use our resources to help them. If the so-called global north start developing water problems, we will start focusing on ourselves again, and the people in the global south will suffer for that. So I'm not sure whether that answer the questions, but I think these are all considerations to do about the differences. I mean, I think that the simple answer is that in the global north we don't see the effects yet, but we need to be aware of it because the entire economic society is based on the use of water that we take for granted now. Well, in the global south, they simply need water to survive.
Yes, yes. Anyone want to say anything now, just to add on to that or move on?
It's just a comment to agree with you, Fabio. You gave up 2 African examples in your 3 examples. I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and what really hit me hard was when the COVID crisis came.
Yeah.
People simply couldn't get washed in most of Africa. There was the most basic things, and it all seems to hinge around money, like most of the problems in the world. There's a lot of groundwater across Africa, but there's no resources to access it. And you know, we sit at home and have our showers and never ever think about even turning a tap off quickly or anything like that. And yet you go into developing countries and it's like landing in a different planet. People just live their lives in a completely different way, and watching small kids wash themselves in really horrendous stuff is not an experience I enjoy at all. But yes, I'd just like to say to your comment about the global north becoming engrossed in its own problems over the next few years is really worrisome.
One of the things that I thanks, Cliff. Sorry, I don't actually know what your all experience is, but I just wanted to add that one of the problems, though, is that we often, as well in the global north, think about the global south as needing our charity only. And you know, there's another beautiful book, if you ever happen to be able to read it. It's called Ripples from the Zambezi. And it's about empowering people rather than just giving them charity. So I was recently, when we were recently doing this event, which was basically about clean water in places off the grid, places with no infrastructure. This exact issue came up, and there was one of the panelists was a woman called Carla Fleming, who used to work for the IBM Africa and is now as her own consultancy firm, which is about providing people the knowledge to maintain water infrastructure. And what she was emphasizing, that we really have to move our mindset from providing charity to collaborating and to listening to the needs and work together at finding solutions. And this is, I think, it's one of the main issues that we have, and it's really a question of approach.
I totally agree, and the World Food Programme has woken up to that fact over the last decade, where it's actually put our farmers out of business by shifting in excess crops from other regions, and then can't understand why the farmers are going bust at a high rate of not. So yeah, there is some, and in fact, I think there was a quite well-known African author. She was in one of the big, I think Goldman Sachs, a senior advisor there, and she wrote a book about really the donations were the worst thing that ever happened to developing countries, and in particular Africa.
Thank you. Was it Chris?
Yes, just a couple of quick points. It's April in the UK. It's April everywhere. And it has scarcely rained in Lincolnshire in the last 2 months. And I grow very small amounts of raspberries and rhubarb and black currants and red currants and so on, and then some courgettes and things like that. And my water butts are now empty. And I am having to start to try to save bits of water from washing up. And I even used my hose pipe the other day for a few minutes just to make sure I got enough water around the back there. Okay, I'm sure there's things with grey water that we could do in the house and so on and so forth. So that's just one example. Then the other extreme is that, as we know, in the last few years, there's been some incredibly wet periods, and we've had riverbanks breaking in various parts of Lincolnshire. I'm in Nettleham, and we're on Barling's top end, and a bit further down, Fabio won't know the geography of all this, but there's a place called Short Ferry, and essentially a load of streams turn up there, all come together, converge, and then you have bits of farmland, significant areas of farmland, underwater for months at a time. So there's got to be something done to sort of strike a balance here in some way or another. And the opening statement on the slides about who's going to do it when and so on and so forth, that is so relevant, even in a place like this, and a pretty affluent part of the UK, which is a pretty affluent country overall. And it's these little bits of supermarket adage about every little helps. Well, it does, but you just need to push it.
Just to comment on that, I'm going to say something now that when you look at infrastructure development in the UK, I lived in a house some years ago where out the back, under the ground of the patio area, or the concrete area, there was a huge tank where all the rainwater that landed on the roof ended in their storage tank. And it was there, and this house was from the 1920s. And in the 1920s, that was the tank where you put a pump in, a hand pump, to pump it out to wash your clothes.
Yeah.
When you look at modern house development or modern business development or any building infrastructure, I don't see any of that being built into it. It's more about putting drains in to take water away and then being charged for it to happen. Is that so? When we talk about this integrated approach, is it about the consumer? Is it about the producer, the house builder? Is it about the planning frameworks and regulatory frameworks?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have the answer, but I think it's about all of them. It's so. I don't know that this is really maybe a naive comment, but at the end of the day, I think when we talk about what can the common citizen do as well, I think it's also putting pressure on regulators, politicians, whatever they are, to look at these issues as well, and unless, because okay, we can do our bit by using less water, but by collecting the water, but at the end of the day, if partly there is a bit of let's say maybe understandable laziness about it, which is the equivalent of the if your energy is cheaper, you just turn up the heating rather than just saving money, and partly is the fact that it is something to think about, and not everybody wants to think, but eventually I think one of the most important things that the individuals can do is just put pressure on those who eventually make regulations and make laws.
Okay, if there's two things you think all students leaving school at 18 now ought to understand about this, what two things do you think they ought to understand?
I think one thing is that, and I'm not sure how they will understand, is that water is not really, clean water is not really infinite. It is the same as energy. The fossil fuels, they're not. I don't want to talk about fossil fuels now too much, but when we think about fossil fuels, there's two problems there. One is that they are bad for the environment, they're bad for climate change, but also they're not infinite. At some point they will finish. And with water is the same. It's not necessarily bad for the environment, but it is finished. It is a finite, and we cannot pretend to be using it as we cannot keep taking it for granted. That I think has to be something that that is important for them to understand. Second one, I think actually that could do already. If they just understood that would be enough.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else want to raise any issues, or David?
Right. Yes. Can you hear me now? I think that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's just really from building on those ideas there about what we can do. Are there things which we can, well, two questions to this. One is, are there things from the past that we could perhaps reintroduce, that like the water storage for your roof waste, your roof water? Are there things from the past that really we need to think about it again? And with your work and looking at the work you're doing now, what are the things which really excite you about how we might be able to, the technology or the science, which might actually help with the development of water sanitation, or with distributing water in a better way?
But so you mean from the past,
Yeah.
I
So,
think
ancient practices, basically.
Well, in terms of ancient practices they're ancient, but they need rejuvenating, if you like. One is what I was talking about before. That seems like science fiction, but it's not necessarily. That is atmospheric water harvesting. I think that's scientifically, I think is extremely interesting, and I think that more than in terms of aspects that are, and I'm talking about research here, is everything which is known as frugal engineering. So the rainwater harvesting is one example, and there's and everything which has to do with ways of finding ways to produce clean water, for example, with cheap means, without having to go to very strong technologies. So I'm not sure whether that can be considered something from the past. It isn't really. Water harvesting it is, and there's a lot of research there to try to understand whether it really is sustainable. And I think that's something, for example, that I want to cover in the journal as soon as we start. But what I was referring to is also the idea of creating materials from plants and from crops to produce clean water, to filter water in a way that is sustainable for the environment as well. So I know that is not part of the technology from the past. It is in fact much more looking into smart ways of doing it from the future. But I guess that I mentioned it because we are used to think about the development of technology that eventually is very expensive, and instead doing something like that is looking at the other ways, looking at finding ways that are much more affordable, much more sustainable.
And hi, okay, thank you, Fabio. That's good. That's better. For that, it's been much appreciated, and it was really important you came this evening. I did quite a bit of research in preparing for this, but that background and that overview showed just how complex this area is and how much it interacts with so many other things. Shortage of water can lead to wars. The idea of countries, perhaps in the River Nile, for example, where they may not be collaborating and stealing their own water, and that can lead to migration problems and all sorts of related things and food supplies. So it's been really good this evening, and we all wish you the very best in your future project with nature water, and perhaps we look forward to tapping your resources again in the future. But thank you very much.